One of my favorite characters from history is this guy from ancient Greece called Zeno of Elea. He came up with all kinds of crazy paradoxes. One of them was the idea that motion is impossible. There was this Austrian guy named Gödel who studied infinity. He came up with all these different theories on different kinds of infinity. One of them involved two lines, one line that was flat and one line above it that was at an angle. The start and the ending points were the same on the x-axis, but the line on top was longer since it was tilted. But you could connect every point on one line to the other line since they were directly above one another. And of course, each line had an infinite number of points that you could connect to one another since they were directly above one another. Each point on the upper, longer, tilted line could be connected to a similar point on the lower, shorter, flat line. And both lines, therefore, would have the same number of infinite points. On the number line, a different line, you'll find three types of numbers: whole numbers, rational numbers, and irrational numbers. Whole numbers are numbers like 0, 1, 2, 3. Rational numbers are the ones that can be expressed as ratios, or one whole number divided by another whole number, otherwise known as a fraction, 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, etc. The number of fractions between 0 and 1 is infinite because a number on the bottom, you can just keep adding another number to it all the way up to infinity. There's an idea that math doesn't exist. Plato and all those other old school philosopher guys had the idea that nature is imperfect and only can be perfected by the ideas of humans that come up with these philosophical ideas that exist only inside of our brains. But if those ideas can only exist inside of our brains and nature is imperfect, what can be said about nature before humans showed up? What was the state of nature when there was only monkeys who were throwing poo at each other? What about pi? Pi is the most famous irrational number. It's not irrational because it's crazy. It's irrational because it cannot be expressed as a ratio between two whole numbers. And it goes on forever. If you could look into the infinity of pi onto the right side of the decimal place, you'd find every number that ever existed if you looked long enough, since it goes on for infinity. You could find your phone number. You could find your social security number. You could find every number that was created by any human who ever lived. At the same time, pi doesn't exist except inside of our brain. You can calculate both the size of the hydrogen atom and the size of the universe with only a couple dozen digits of pi. You can land people on the moon within a couple of inches using only a couple dozen digits of pi. Pi as an abstract symbol shows up in all kinds of crazy places where they wouldn't expect it to show up, like Euler's identity. But what if pi only exists in our brains? What if Plato is right? What if perfection is only a hallucination and nature really is imperfect? What does nature think about nature? What was pi before humans showed up? What does it mean that we humans can hallucinate things that don't exist, yet use those hallucinated, non-existent ideas to make things that do exist? What if nothing exists and everything is a hallucination? What if Descartes was right all along? What if all we really know is that we are and that we are thinking and everything is a hallucination? What if I and all the words I've said so far and all the words I haven't said yet are a hallucination inside of your brain? The number of rational numbers between 0 and 1 is infinite. The number of irrational numbers between 0 and 1 is infinite. The rational numbers represent a countable infinity. The irrational numbers represent an uncountable infinity. That means between 0 and 1, there are two kinds of infinity just kind of hanging out next to each other. What Gödel realized was that because both lines had the same number of infinite points, but one was longer than the other, that meant that some infinities are denser than other infinities. Zeno's paradox was that in order to get from point A to point B, you have to first get halfway between point A and point B. And then to get to that point, you have to get halfway there. Pretty soon you get an infinite number of halfway points. And because it would take forever to go through an infinite number of points, that must mean that motion is impossible.